The morning Daniel Chen found someone's private thoughts scribbled on his coffee cup, he realized that sometimes the most honest conversations happen when people think no one is listening. Daniel was 38, a furniture restoration specialist who had spent the last 6 years turning other people's broken heirlooms into something worth keeping. He worked alone in a converted garage studio on the east side of Portland, and most mornings he walked 3 blocks to the same coffee shop because the alternative was making instant coffee in a microwave he didn't trust. He wasn't lonely exactly, just used to his own company. His divorce had been quiet and adult, the kind where both people agreed they had become roommates who split bills rather than partners who split dreams. She had remarried 2 years ago. He had learned to drink his coffee black because it was one less thing to think about. The shop was called Ember and Ground, a narrow brick storefront wedged between a dry cleaner and a tattoo parlor. It smelled like burnt sugar and wet cardboard in the best possible way. The owner kept a chalkboard menu that never changed, and a succulent garden on the windowsill that was slowly dying despite everyone's best efforts. Daniel always ordered the same thing at the same time, 7:15 on weekdays, and the barista who worked the morning shift had his order started before he reached the counter. Her name was Iris Montgomery, and she had been working there for about 8 months. She was 41, which Daniel only knew because he had overheard her mention it to a customer once when someone made a clumsy joke about carding her. She wore her dark hair in a braid that hung over one shoulder and rotated through the same 5 flannel shirts like a uniform she had chosen for herself. She had the kind of face that looked serious until she smiled, and then it didn't. She made his Americano the same way every time, extra hot, no room, and she always wrote his name on the side of the cup in neat block letters even though he was usually the only person waiting. Except this particular Tuesday, she didn't write his name. She wrote something else. Daniel didn't notice until he was halfway back to the studio, balancing the cup in one hand while unlocking the side gate with the other. He glanced down at the cup and stopped walking. The handwriting was small and slanted, crammed into the space where his name usually went, and it said, "Sometimes I think you're the only person who doesn't need anything from me." Daniel stood there long enough that his neighbor's dog started barking through the fence. He read it again. Then he looked back toward the coffee shop, but he was already too far away to see through the window. He went inside, set the cup on his workbench, and stared at it for a full minute before taking a sip. The coffee was still hot. The words were still there. He had no idea what to do with either. He thought about it all morning while he sanded the legs of a dining table that had been painted lime green in the 70s and regretted ever since. The note didn't make sense. He didn't know Iris, not really. They exchanged maybe 30 words a week, most of them logistical. She asked if he wanted his receipt. He said no thanks. She told him to have a good one. He said you too. That was the extent of it. He had never asked her how her day was going or what she did when she wasn't standing behind an espresso machine. He had certainly never given her the impression that he didn't need anything from her because he very clearly needed coffee, which was the entire reason he walked into her shop 5 days a week. By noon, Daniel had convinced himself it was a mistake. She had written it on the wrong cup. It was meant for someone else, maybe a regular he had never noticed, someone who came in right after him and ordered something complicated. That made sense. That was the only explanation that made sense. He finished the table legs, cleaned his brushes, and decided he would go back tomorrow and pretend he hadn't seen anything, because acknowledging it would be worse than ignoring it. Except Wednesday morning, Iris looked at him differently. She didn't say anything, but when he walked up to the counter, she held his eyes for half a second longer than usual, and her expression did something he couldn't name. She made his coffee without asking. She handed it to him without a word. And when Daniel glanced down at the cup, there was nothing written on it at all. No name, no note. Just blank white space and a faint coffee ring near the rim. He almost asked. He got as far as opening his mouth, but she had already turned away to wipe down the steamer, and the moment folded shut before he could figure out what question he was even trying to ask. He left $1 in the tip jar and walked out into the cold. "Thursday," she wrote. "You don't perform when you're tired." "Friday," she wrote. "I don't have to be interesting when you're here." Saturday, nothing. By Monday, Daniel had stopped pretending he didn't know what was happening. Iris was writing things on his cup that she couldn't say out loud, and he was letting her because reading them felt like overhearing a conversation he wasn't supposed to be part of and discovering it was about him. He didn't know why she had started. He didn't know if she wanted him to respond or if the point was that he wouldn't. But he knew he was thinking about her more than he had thought about anyone in a long time, and that scared him in a way that felt almost like relief. Monday's cup said, "I'm tired of people who need me to audition." Daniel stood outside the shop with the coffee going cold in his hand and made a decision that felt both reckless and overdue. He went back inside. Iris was restocking the pastry case, her back to the counter. The shop was empty except for an older man reading a newspaper in the corner booth. Daniel cleared his throat. Iris turned around. She saw the cup in his hand and went very still. "I'm not performing," Daniel said quietly. "I don't know how. And I've never asked you to audition for anything." He set the cup on the counter between them. "But I think you already know that." Iris stared at him. Her hands were still holding a tray of croissants. She set it down carefully like she was buying herself time. When she finally spoke, her voice was low enough that the man in the corner wouldn't hear. "I didn't think you were reading them." "I've read every single one," Daniel said. She looked at the cup, then at him, then out the window at nothing in particular. "I shouldn't have written them." "Why did you?" "Because I got divorced 9 months ago," she said, and the words came out flat and factual, like she was telling him the shop opened at 6. "And I spent 2 years with someone who only wanted the version of me that made him look good at dinner parties. And then you started coming in here every morning, and you never once asked me how I was doing, and it was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in years." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. He stood there holding his breath like the wrong word would break whatever this was. Iris folded her arms across her chest, not defensively, but like she was cold. "You just drink your coffee. You don't try to make me laugh. You don't need me to be charming. And I don't know, I think I just—" She stopped, shook her head. "I think I wanted you to know that someone noticed." "I noticed you too," Daniel said, and it was the truest thing he'd said in months. They stood there looking at each other across 4 feet of scuffed tile and 10 years of separate damage, and Daniel understood with absolute certainty that if he didn't ask the next question, he would regret it longer than anything else he had failed to do. "Do you want to get dinner sometime?" he asked. "Somewhere that's not here, where neither of us has to perform." Iris smiled, small and cautious, like she was testing whether it was safe. "I'd love that," she said. They met that Thursday at a diner on Hawthorne that served breakfast all day and played Fleetwood Mac on a jukebox no one had updated since 1989. Iris wore the same flannel she had been wearing the first time he read one of her notes, and Daniel wore the cleanest shirt he owned that didn't smell like wood stain. They sat in a corner booth with cracked red vinyl seats and ordered eggs they didn't particularly want because it gave them something to do with their hands. "I don't actually know anything about you," Iris said, pouring hot sauce onto her hash browns in a way that suggested she had done this 1,000 times. "Except that you drink Americanos and you don't make small talk." "There's not much to know," Daniel said. "I fix furniture. I live alone. I'm bad at plants." That's pretty much the list. "Why furniture?" "Because it's easier than fixing people," Daniel said, and then immediately wished he hadn't, because it sounded like something a character in a movie would say right before the violin started. But Iris didn't laugh. She just nodded, like he had said something obvious. "I get that," she said. "I make coffee for a living because it's a thing I can finish. Someone orders it, I make it, they leave. It's clean. My marriage wasn't clean. My ex-husband thought love was a performance review. I got really tired of being graded." Daniel set his fork down. "What was his name?" "Marcus," Iris said. "He's a consultant. He consults about things that don't need consulting. We met at a work thing, and I thought he was impressive, and it turned out impressive just meant loud." She looked at Daniel with an expression that was half apology, half challenge. "I'm not fishing for sympathy. I just don't want to pretend I'm not coming into this with a few dents." "I have dents too," Daniel said. "My ex-wife's name was Lauren. We got married because we were both 30, and it seemed like the thing people did. And then we spent 6 years being polite to each other until she met someone who made her laugh, and I realized I didn't blame her." Iris leaned back in the booth. "Do you miss her?" "No," Daniel said. "I miss the idea that I was good at being married. But I wasn't. I was just good at being quiet." "There's a difference between quiet and empty," Iris said. "You're not empty." Daniel didn't know how she could possibly know that, but he didn't argue. They finished their eggs. They ordered coffee they didn't need just to stay longer. And when they finally walked out into the parking lot 2 hours later, Daniel felt like he had said more true things in one meal than he had in the entire last year of his marriage. "Can I ask you something?" Iris said, stopping by her car. "After tonight, I feel like I should be nervous," Daniel said. "You probably should." She smiled. "Why didn't you ever ask me how I was doing?" "Everyone asks. It's the first thing people say." Daniel thought about it. "Because I figured if you wanted to tell me, you would. And if you didn't, I wasn't going to make you perform an answer just to be polite." Iris looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and kissed him, light and quick, like she was testing whether the world would end if she did. It didn't. When she pulled back, she was smiling for real this time. "For the record," she said, "I'm not made of glass." Over the next 6 weeks, they built something that didn't require maintenance. Daniel started coming to the coffee shop 15 minutes earlier just to talk to her before the morning rush started. Iris started stopping by his studio after her shift ended, sitting on a stool near his workbench while he worked, and she scrolled through her phone or read a book she kept forgetting to finish. They didn't go on elaborate dates. They got takeout and ate it on his couch. They went to a hardware store together because he needed sandpaper, and she wanted to see what kind of person he became in the presence of organized tools. They talked about small things and large things without marking the difference. But 7 weeks in, Marcus came back. Iris called Daniel on a Saturday morning, her voice tight and strange, and said she needed him to come to the coffee shop. When he arrived, Marcus was standing near the counter, tall and polished and wearing a jacket that probably cost more than Daniel's rent. He looked like someone who had never doubted a single decision he had ever made. Iris was behind the counter, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "Daniel, this is Marcus," Iris said, her voice carefully neutral. "He stopped by to tell me he made a mistake." Marcus extended his hand like they were at a networking event. Daniel didn't take it. "I wanted to talk to Iris," Marcus said, his tone reasonable and measured, the kind of voice that made you feel unreasonable for objecting to it. "I think we owe it to ourselves to have an honest conversation about what we walked away from." "We didn't walk away," Iris said quietly. "You walked away. I stayed exactly where I was." "I'm trying to fix that," Marcus said, and he looked at Daniel like he was hoping for backup, one reasonable man to another. "I think if we could just sit down without," he gestured vaguely at Daniel, "without an audience." Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. He looked at Iris. She was staring at Marcus like he was a word problem she couldn't solve. "Do you want me to leave?" Daniel asked. "No," Iris said immediately. She looked at Marcus. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up 9 months later and act like I've been waiting for you to figure out what you lost. I'm not a mistake you get to fix." "I'm not saying you are," Marcus said, and his voice stayed calm, which made it worse. "I'm saying I didn't appreciate what we had. And I think you're making a decision out of hurt instead of clarity." "That's because you think everyone is for sale just because you are," Daniel said, and the words came out before he had decided to say them. Marcus turned to look at him, and for the first time his composure cracked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Daniel said. He wasn't angry. He was just finished. "Iris already told you no. That should have been enough." Marcus stared at him. Then he looked at Iris, waiting for her to soften, to apologize, to perform the version of herself that made things easier. She didn't. She stepped out from behind the counter and stood next to Daniel, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You should go," she said to Marcus. He left. The door chime rang behind him, bright and incongruous. Iris let out a long breath and leaned into Daniel, her forehead resting against his shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not trying to fight him for me," she said. "For just standing there." Daniel kissed the top of her head. "I know you don't need me to fight for you." "No," Iris said, pulling back to look at him. "But I need you to stand next to me while I do." 3 months later, Daniel asked Iris to move into the apartment above his studio. 6 months after that, he proposed in the same diner where they had eaten terrible eggs and told each other the truth. A year after the first cup, they were married in a courthouse ceremony with 2 friends as witnesses and no performance required. And on quiet mornings, when they woke up early and made coffee in their own kitchen, Iris still wrote things on Daniel's cup sometimes. Small truths she wanted him to carry. Pieces of herself she didn't have to explain. And Daniel still read every single one because he understood by then that love wasn't about needing someone to be more than they were. It was about noticing them exactly as they were and choosing to stay. What would you have done if you found a confession written on your coffee cup from someone you barely knew? And have you ever met someone who made you feel like you didn't have to perform just to be worth their time? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.